Hi folks, I'm Pamela Young and this is Thrive 2030, brought to you by Growth Curve. And today I have Sue Kench, who is the Global Chief Executive of the international law firm King Wood Mallesons. Hello Sue, how are you today?
Hi Pamela, great to be here.
Yeah, good to see you again. It's been a while. Just introducing the firm, Sue. I understand the firm has been around since the 1830s, which is a long way back, and I had no idea that it originated from Western Australia. I just assumed it was an East Coast firm, but that's an interesting piece of fast fact for viewers. And you have grown right throughout Australia and internationally up until the point in 2012 when you merged with King Wood from China and became a truly international firm with very strong holds from both Australia, China, and I think the firm now has offices in the UK and across Europe, Middle East, and the United States, as well as the Asia Pacific. Have I forgotten anything?
Japan, yes,
oh, Japan.
But of course that's it's probably North Asia. So to the extent you said Asia, yes. That's
there
fine.
you go.
Yep.
So a really big mandate. So I know that you are a very busy woman. You've been in this role now for a couple of years, having held the Chief Executive of Australia role for many years. And how long have you been up in Hong Kong as the Global Chief Executive?
Well, I took on the global role in mid-2017. As you know, I have 3 children, so I couldn't just up and go.
Yes.
Had to break the news to them. So we moved to Hong Kong in January 2018, which in many ways seems decades ago. It wasn't, of course, but so much has happened since then. We've had the protests here and now we're living through this pandemic. So about three and a half years. We love it. Yeah.
It's a beautiful city. So I'm going to join you there before we move on. Just give me a minute to find my beautiful cityscape, which is not coming up. Oh, here we go. Look, I've got this gorgeous evening scene to join you tonight, even though it's mid-afternoon. So it is a gorgeous city, and it is a wonderful hub, isn't it, for your Asian business and your global business, because it's still a thriving metropolis and it's still highly ranked as one of the world's most progressive financial centres of the world. So you are well placed to span the Asia Pacific region and the world from there. And so I'm delighted to have this opportunity to get your view about what you can see about how the pandemic is treating people, how we're all responding, and what we can do about navigating this uncertain time to get us to 2030. Before we get there, can I ask you where you were? So when the news hit, when you heard that there was a pandemic, had been confirmed by world authorities, where were you at the time?
We were in Whistler skiing, although I think at the time we were more worried about the fact that it was minus 35 degrees and freezing cold. But Whistler, and then we came back into Hong Kong, and I think it's when we came back into Hong Kong, China was in the grip of the pandemic. But even then, we really didn't expect it to take off around the world like it did. So it was still early days. That was January, end of January, February. I was back in Australia, but it was Whistler when we first heard.
Yes.
Back in Hong Kong, and that was really when we were much more aware of what was going on in Wuhan in China.
And when you had that news, and you were in Australia, obviously, with the top team, what were the conversations going on? What were the top things on your mind? When you called them to, let's have a chat about this, what is our reaction going to be? What approach did you take to that?
Well, there were many conversations before I went into Australia, really about what was going on in China. And of course, Hong Kong had put up with SARS back in the early 2000s.
Yes.
So had been through it before, and quite funny really, in the last few years, we had the odd conversation around that experience in the early 2000s. And of course, what happens in Hong Kong when anyone is sick, really, pandemic or not, on come the masks. So the masks were on by late January. The conversations across the firm were, all right, well, this is going on in China. And we were aware, I guess, at that stage about what might be going on in some of the other locations we're in, so what was going on in Singapore, what's happening in Hong Kong. But I still flew on planes. I was a bit more aware, took the old disinfectant wipes on the planes, and also, made sure there were masks on as well. But, not a great deal of nervousness at that stage. So, but as you mentioned, I was down in Sydney and Perth actually for some time in February, and it was then that we had a return traveller who had been skiing in Europe, who had come back and had been a close contact to someone who was positive. And I guess that's when, it hit home in the firm. There'd been some very early suggestions of perhaps cases in Sydney at that point, and, what firms were wondering what they might do. But then we had one in our midst, or a possible one. So we were sitting there, it must have been a Thursday or a Friday, and the conversation was, do we shut down a floor? Do we shut down a couple of floors? Do we shut down the cafe? We've got a staff cafe on the premises as well. And I just posed the question of, well, why wouldn't we shut down the whole firm at that point, given it was a Thursday or a Friday? At that point, we'd been saying to staff, make sure you take your laptops home, just so that, if we did find ourselves in such a circumstance, things could continue on. But anyway, that's what we did. We shut down the premises. We probably did that, was probably a week ahead of many other businesses who shut down. The person who was the close contact ended up not being a positive, which was terrific for the firm. Absolutely. But that really brought everything front and centre for us in Australia at that point. And it also said to us, this is about the health of our people. So, you don't put that at risk. And even though I guess we went early, it was definitely the right thing to do. We were in touch with the authorities early, and as I say, ended up with negative testing. But that was, I think that was late February or early March.
And when you, after that, a few weeks had gone by, you were all at home, you understood then that this was going to be the way for however long across the region, across the world, and definitely across Australia where you were at the time. What would be some of the reactions that you had from your people? What were you hearing from them about the adjustment? Did they think it was going to be short term? Did they adapt to it? Did you have some early challenges around isolation and how do we delegate? How do we work in teams?
Yeah, I don't think anyone quite comprehended how significant and permanent this would be. Yeah. As I say, SARS was months. Everyone was, quite nervous, and it took a while to readjust after SARS. But SARS did not have that global reach. And amazing, right? That's nearly 20 years ago, the connectivity that exists now. And obviously Australia shut its borders to China quite early. And then from a firm perspective, thank goodness, we were very mobile. So, people had access remotely. They set up their home offices, and incredibly, the firm just carried on. We did give some subsidies to people to make sure that they felt comfortable with their home offices and the tech, but we were ahead of the curve on the tech, and all of that planning that had been done really to enable people in the office to be able to move around remotely in and out of conference rooms just carried on, and remotely working from home. And of course, when we'd had that in China in the months before, we were talking about it as this great big working from home experiment. Well, no longer an experiment. Yes. It happened. And then, yes, over time, as people became more and more aware that this was not a week or two, this was much more sustained, then you have to go in and be quite mindful of, isolation, different demographics, different groups around the partnership, different pressures, older people who...
You have 29 offices or something in that region, almost 3,000 people. There's a lot of different complexities, isn't there? As you say, different cultures, different sized offices, different equipped offices.
Different sized offices, different responses, offices in Europe, like China. So China, again, moved to working from home very early. That was very much, again, around the health wellbeing issue. So straight from home, also very tech enabled. Same in Europe, but Europe, I guess, certainly in Australia and in China, we didn't have any positive cases, but we did have more experiences of that in some of our locations in Europe. So that was a real health issue. And I think really we did see some of the suffering, the personal suffering that came about through the pandemic, through some of our European offices. Yeah. Pleased to say everyone's well now. But of course, London was hit very hard, and many of the centres in Europe were hit very hard from a health and wellbeing perspective. Whereas, over here in Asia and in Australia, lockdowns were the thing of the day, and so they've managed the health quite well. Different issues now in terms of opening up, but that was a different story on the other side of the world. And New York was the same, when you saw how that just spread through the US and the New York office. It's very sad, really, to see New York go from this incredibly vibrant city into something that everyone escaped from. So yes, you're right. No, quite different.
So from your clients' perspective, what changes and challenges did you notice them coping with or having to cope with?
Yeah, so different clients responded in different ways, but many of them, many of our clients are, big organisations who are as tech-enabled as we are, some not so. So for the ones who, we did find that we needed to reach in and help some clients with their tech. So our technology and innovation groups did that. But as I say, many of them really didn't miss a beat. So, everyone's working from home with different backgrounds and with families behind them, and just carrying on. Quite extraordinary. It is amazing to think that, sometimes we're incredibly lucky in some ways. The pandemic has happened at a time when we are so tech-enabled. If it had been of such reach 20 years ago, and if SARS had been so much bigger than it was, would we have been able to cope so well with the connectivity across all of the tech and the Zoom, and quite extraordinary, really, how everybody's adapted so far.
So fast, you're right. If it had happened before, it would have been challenging. With the GFC and the Wall Street crash, those big economic financial disasters, there was a different reaction, obviously, because they were financial catastrophes, and there were quite a lot of demergers, and insolvency rose through the roof. Are you seeing that same reaction and response? Is that what people are doing?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? So, of course, when all of this happened, it was unprecedented. We had not had this across the world. You had the two big economies, China in that first quarter of the calendar year in lockdown. You had a virus spreading at incredible rates through the US and Europe, and nobody knew. And anyone who said, oh, yes, well, we've got this, we know what's going to happen, nobody knew. So you had this incredible feeling of uncertainty and what is happening next. But of course, remembering that, as you say, the GFC was a financial crisis. Things were not well in so many organisations and banks, etc. But this was a health crisis. But would a health crisis lead to a financial crisis, and how long was it going to last? So many questions in those early days. So once we turned from, okay, we've got to make sure our people's health, that was the number one priority, to get them back home, get them safe, turn to an online working environment, make sure our clients are okay, checking in on that. Then it moved to, all right, now how long is this going to last, and what do we need to do to make sure that we can continue to keep the business running in as healthy way as possible? And I'm sure every organisation across the globe was doing that. So we were doing that from our own perspective. Do we have enough cash in the business? Do we, and that's both capital that that partners commit to the business, and it's also what external financing have we got, and, you know, concerns around, you know, how are our clients, what economic financial position are they going to be in, will they be able to, you know, pay invoices on time, or will there be a lag? So it turned to, do we have enough cash on hand to carry us through what we didn't know was going to happen? So all different sort of scenario planning in relation to that. Gosh, if I look back now, Easter last year was a pretty busy time as we got all of that together, and, you know, senior management, board meetings, a flurry really, just to try and get a grip and say, okay, what do we need to do to keep confidence and stability in the business? So that was a long time ago, and of course it taught us a lot at the same time. But and of course for law firms, you know, we're a service industry, professional service industry, very dependent upon all of the clients that we have, and of course we've got quite a diverse book of those. So hospitality, travel clients, obviously more impacted than others. But
what type of services, you know, were they calling upon you for?
Well, like us, certainly in Australia, and different economies react differently. But in Australia, it was the same thing really across a lot of the larger organisations, which is, do we have enough cash? So in those early days, it was about building their cash through capital raisings or bank facilities. So really a flurry to make sure that everyone had enough cash in reserve to keep that business going. And so that was there was a lot of work on that in the early days. There was quite a degree of work around insolvency, but that dropped off after all of the government support came in, JobKeeper, etc. And then the big question for law firms really is do we lag? That happened in the GFC, so there's always a bit of a flight to quality. That's what you find in a crisis, is people go to quality brands. They need that reassurance, and that's what happened. But then the big question was, will we lag? And you might recall people were wondering if the economics and business cycles would be a V or a W or an L or a U, or again, nobody really knew. And when would that downward stroke on the V occur, or W? It's really, you know, preparing ourselves for that and making sure we were in as robust a position as possible.
Did you notice any particular industries which were struggling more than others? Obviously, as you mentioned, travel, tourism, hospitality. Were there other sectors that were not so obvious, that were kind of hit badly, that needed a lot more support? Yeah,
look, we're a large international law firm, right? So it was a lot of the small to medium-sized businesses. They just don't keep that capital reserve. So I, you know, excellent really that we had JobKeeper come in to give them that support. I can remember watching it was the news in the UK when they brought in their furlough scheme, and I was sort of having a hurrah moment that, you know, how wonderful would that be if governments came in to provide that support, which of course many did. And that again just gives you this sense of, I think the words used back then were Team Australia, were coming in to look after people, recognising again that it was a health crisis. So for us, you know, we have quite a diverse client book, not so exposed to travel. But even on some of the airlines, yes, we did work for them again.
What about the property sector, property and real estate?
Well, again, you know, fascinating, because they require tenants in business, raising revenue to be able to pay their rents. So a lot of them, I think, also had questions around, and remember, of course, that a lot of people that invest in the property sector and those listed firms, or on those listed firms, are the big superannuation funds. Superannuation funds are, of course, our mums and dads and the broader community. So it would have had a ripple effect right the way across all of those industries. So in the early days, again, they had the same question, what will it mean to our cash flows and how do we stabilise the business? You had retail, which, of course, was in lockdown. People immediately make sure they've got savings, they don't spend money. So again, we do an enormous amount of work across the property industry, be it in retail, be it in office, be it in industrial. Industrial probably fared better because people were buying online, and you've got big logistics issues. But yes, a lot of work also for the property industry. It's good to see, though, how they came through. And I think we'll be fine. And now you're seeing a bit of an uptick and, a move back to investment in it. But of course, in those early days, no one really knew what was going on, and they just had to draw on, I guess, past experiences. And the most recent was GFC, and then before that it was 9/11. Different sort of a shock, but again, nobody knew what would happen then.
Yes. I mean, there are still many nations that are in full lockdown right across Asia, isn't there? Thailand, Malaysia, they have about 9,000 cases a day. New Zealand and Australia are extremely fortunate to be, with such low numbers and to be able to pretty much live a reasonably normal life. But it's going to be a long journey, isn't it, down the track? And that's why I'm wondering about the impact on the property sector in the long term, because a lot of people are not coming back to work, even Australia and New Zealand, and companies are having to mandate that they should come back for 2 days a week. So if you had 10 floors once upon a time, you might now only need 5. So there's going to be a fair bit of space around the cities, which might need to be redeployed for some other purpose. Have you had any suggestion from people in the real estate industries about what they might do with this vacant space?
Well, I would say at the moment it's a little bit early to call that one. I agree with you. People have now experienced a different way to work, and there will probably be a move to some hybrid working models. But I think, a law firm, a professional services firm, where we really build ourselves on an apprenticeship model. It requires people to come together, share knowledge, bounce ideas off each other. And observe. And those learning environments. So too early to call, I think, on how many days a week it will be. Certainly it will be different. But in terms of space, I think too early to call as well. We were all in pods and open planning and in more crowded spaces. Will we maintain the same amount of space but redesign it differently to give people more space, more personal space because of these pesky pandemics that may arise in the future? I don't know. Of course, it's interesting when you look in Sydney, and even so over the last 20 years, you've seen a move to more residential in the CBD, whether, there's a rebalancing between office and residential. Don't know. And then, of course, what will happen in the retail space, you'd already had a move to online. But again, people like to come together in shopping centres to congregate and entertain themselves and do different things. It will definitely shift. What it will shift to, I'm not sure. I think everyone's realised in this pandemic that human beings, or it's a reminder, I think we always knew, but it's a reminder, like many things, that we're social. We're social beings, and we like to come together and
we do,
and learn from each other. So too early to call, I would say. Certainly, the geographies of cities is an interesting thing too. Sydney's quite contained. It's got the Sydney Basin, so it's always been pressured when it comes to real estate. Melbourne's slightly different. It sprawls out a little bit more. And interesting in terms of demographics, before you saw a move from people into Melbourne, will they move out? Will they move out from Sydney? Will you have a more permanent population in some of the regional areas? I don't know. So that's another one of those uncertainties we need to keep an eye on, I think.
Yes, I think there is a bit of a regional move to the regions in Australian major cities. At least that's what's been reported over the last 6 months, about people finding that, no point in sitting in their expensive city apartment when they could be in their country location.
Well, indeed, and I think that's what it's shown us is, we can ask more questions and not take things for granted, and that they need to be the way they've always been. From, where I draw my team from, all over. So they don't need to be in the office next to me. They can be anywhere. And I think that's where it's probably reminded us all that, trust our people.
Yeah, trust is the key word, isn't it?
Trust, yeah.
I'm quite curious. So I recently learned that the firm was nominated for an award, which it won by the Financial Times. And I think you were awarded the top prize for digital advancement. And I'm just wondering if you can share with us what some of those amazing digital advancements have been, because I'm wondering about the use of, AI and machine learning and robotics, and how this might be a solution for us over the next few years. Other people have reported an increase in pace of the adoption of these new technologies. And as one of the law firms who have just won an award for digital advancement, would you share with us what sophisticated adoptions you have undertaken over the last year or two that helped you through this period of time?
Yeah, so many just that we're communicating as we are right now, all of the Zoom and the WebEx technologies, amazing, that will continue to develop. It will bring teams together. You've seen that by the way you can reach all over the world and bring experts who you might have had to fly in or just wouldn't have been available. So you can bring in experts and knowledge no matter where it is in the world. I think that will certainly continue. You can reach broad audiences. You can do a lot of your client outreach. You can do a lot of your CLE programs, that's continuing learning programs.
Yes.
And you just have, I think, an acceleration and an escalation in the sort of knowledge sharing that will go on.
Yeah.
In terms of the practice of law, quite apart from how we continue to learn, a lot of the AI that's available now and the machine learning that is available is quite sophisticated, and therefore means that we can take out of what we do day to day a lot of what I'll call the commodity or the grunt work, or comparing documents and due diligence, and we can get the machines to be doing that, and they learn. So provided you're feeding in document after document after document, those machines will start to learn, and they will do it way faster than a number of humans can do.
Yes.
Now, you will always need smart humans, but the AI to review it, but the AI can provide safety nets. They can do so much of the early work at significantly reduced cost and also faster.
Yes.
And then, provided you hook into the human mind when it gets complex, then I think that's good for our lawyers. They're highly trained. They don't want to be doing the more boring work, and so it focuses us on solving some of the more complex problems, which is actually the challenge. So a lot of work going on in AI. Of course, some of the challenge there is how do you get people to adopt it. It's there. So a lot of the those awards that you're referring to is the work we've done to get people to adopt it and to incentivize them to do it. Particularly, you probably know, lawyers love to record time in 6-minute units. This is more a value piece. How do you get value out of the work that you're doing rather than simply charge by time? So that's definitely a bit of a shift. So that's one piece. The other benefits of tech at the moment are, of course, data. And lawyers see a lot. And so we'll use data more often to enhance what we see and how we bring things together, be that trends or cost or data analysis, etc. So, multiple uses of tech in law firms, all accelerated through this period, and I think that just gives the people the confidence that it's there to use. It enhances everything that we do, and that will keep going as well. So, in fact, if you're looking for good things that have come out of the pandemic, it is that it's really accelerated and driven those changes, and we won't be going back to the way it was.
Yes. You sit on, you're a member of a number of organisations where think tank conversations occur, like the BCA, Business Council of Australia, AustraliaChina in Beijing, and Wall Street Journal Council. So when you are with those groups of people, having the conversation about, what the regional impact is or what you need to do as a nation or as a region, what are the topics of conversation? What's the tone and the flavour of those conversations? Is it panic, or is it calm, or is it?
I think it's moved from, it's moved from those early days of uncertainty into, gradually that fog of where are things going is starting to lift, maybe. Although, of course, a bit disappointing that Sydney's now in lockdown again, might shake some confidence. But people were starting to get their confidence back. You've got the two major economies in China and the US coming back. That stabilises confidence and grows it as well. Interesting with what's happening in Europe now and the UK as particularly the UK, comes out of their restrictions. That will be interesting to watch.
It will be.
Sure about that experiment.
I'm not too sure about that experiment either, but
let's see. So quite a shift in conversation now. The conversation now is, all right, well, it's all very well to have lockdown and closed borders, but as different strategies are now emerging on how do countries come out of this, and some are, a handful, of course, are coming out of the other side, being quite brave, I guess, about the number of cases on the rise and hospitalisations. But that's the conversation now, is how do you come out of it, keep a sense of safety, keep that confidence. And of course, for Australia, a country which has done incredibly well off the back of globalisation, the question is, how do you start to reopen up to the world? Same issues really here in China and Hong Kong. How do you start opening up? There's still a border between Hong Kong and China. That must be a priority for opening. And in Singapore, of course, Singapore said, well, we need to learn to live with this virus too. So how does that impact, particularly across, Southeast Asia, North Asia, East Asia, all sorts of questions, but much more now around, all right, are we going to start to live with this? What does that mean? And of course, that all happens as now that we have Delta, and no doubt there'll be other strains. So that conversation about recognising really that we are only as strong as our weakest link here, and you're still seeing India struggling, Indonesia struggling. You've got Thailand perhaps opening up, Phuket. I don't know, early days, but that's the conversation has turned to how do we open up, but how at the same time do we keep people safe?
Right. So we've got past the initial period of adjustment. People have pivoted, they've made their adjustments, they know they're going to survive, and now they're ready to start looking forward. So for you, from your firm's perspective, I mean, it's quite challenging when you don't know of 29 offices across, I don't know how many countries, let's say 20-something countries. Some may open, some may not. The developing parts of Asia might open earlier because they've got the infrastructure to vaccinate and the discipline to vaccinate. The developing parts may take longer. As you've just mentioned, India and Indonesia have got very big challenges. How do you manage going forward over the next 2 or 3 years? How do you plan? How do you budget? What's your strategy when you can't really see? It's going to be an incremental one, isn't it? Step by step.
Step by step. So what have we learnt coming out of last year? We've learnt that you can have the best plans in the world, but plans change.
Yes.
And so and this is difficult for lawyers because lawyers like everything to be
perfect. Certainty.
They like certainty. They like perfection. So it's okay, well, we need to let that go. Because if everything had to be perfect back, through March, April, May last year, we would never have got through scenario planning, right? So you've just got to get on and do as best you can with what you know at the time, and then say, all right, and we'll be prepared to zigzag if we have to. But, be open to the trends, see what's happening. I encourage people to look out for those trends, not be in the immediate. Yes, you need to be in the immediate, but be looking out to see when may the trough be and when do things pick up, and what does the shape of that look like? Always be looking out to the horizon. So, we've definitely learnt, doesn't have to be perfect. Move fast. Probably know Asia moves incredibly fast. So there are lessons, I think, for everybody in this. Be prepared to plan, but you've got to be opportunistic as well. You've got to be prepared to act, and everything does not have to be perfect. And at the same time, it said, well, were we a bit complacent about things? Did we think things would always be the same? So again, this has sort of been a bit of a electric prodder really into saying, okay, well, things can change all the time. So how do you respond to that? What's the risk environment that you're operating in? Don't be too risk averse, and be open to opportunity at the same time.
A lot of expats have been returning home, as you know, in Australia, New Zealand, England, US. Everybody's sort of wanting to go home because they can't reach their families. They're missing out on weddings, births and funerals. Maybe their job has collapsed, but there has been in most nations that we know of, a sort of a pull backwards to the home base. And of course, globalization and growth in major industries does require the freedom to be able to move people around so that you can access skills. And leadership in the past has been very visible, having people rock up to a meeting, clap their hands, stand on a stage, go rah, 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 and for people to go, great, the guru has arrived, he or she's going to, champion this program, project or whatever. If we haven't got that ability to resource people as flexibly as we had before, because they have returned home and they're not going to be as mobile if the borders are going to continue to be closed, and or if we don't have that very visible style of leadership with big groups on stages, what does that mean for the firm in terms of both resourcing and management and leadership of talent? Because I do think that we're going to have some questions and challenges around that over the next 1 to 2 years.
Well, we talked before about trust, and I think the last Edelman Trust Survey showed us that people trust the organisations they're in more than they trust government. Yes. And there's got to be a reciprocal piece to that one. So as people trust the organisations and look to them to help with their sense of safety and security and need, so must organisations, trust their people. So what we were just talking about was speed as well, right? Things move fast. They've moved incredibly fast. You cannot wait for one person to direct people because that is very slow. Yes. And I think what we have learned, and I often say, trust is the oil in the machine. So that's what makes things work faster. Ideas can come from anywhere. They're not only for those who might be the one person leading an organisation. Absolutely not. Yeah. So hierarchies will flatten. Ideas can come from anywhere. How do you give people that direction and sort of the rules of the road in the broadest sense possible for them to get into the mix and feel confident that they can go out and do what they can do best? Yeah. And that will continue. I think also what people have learned through this is they've probably questioned their reason for being. Why do they do things more? What's the role of an organisation in society at the moment? So you come back and they look for greater connection in the places they work. You've seen already, I think, a movement where purpose-led organisations will perhaps play a greater role here as people question who they will work for. And in a war for talent, that will continue. That will become more and more important. Certainly, as an organisation, you know, when we were working out how we would deal with the pandemic, we acted according to principles. So probably some more principled behaviours and actions. What are your priorities? Do you stand by what you say? And that sense of transparency, right? People in a room before, rah, but did they know what went on behind the scenes? There's much more transparency now, much more questioning of things. Social media means that in many respects. So, you know, it comes back to trust. Why do you exist? Why does an organisation exist? Make sure you align everything to that. I'm not in for buzzwords. And so when people talk about authenticity, you know, for me, it's like, just be real. Make sure that what you say, you then do. And I think there will be more of that as people say, you know, I will work for those organisations where I feel I can trust them and they can trust me, and hopefully a harnessing of that. And then, you know, that then comes really across nations and across countries and regions as well. I think what we all realise now is there are some things which any one person or any one nation cannot solve. The virus is not stuck to one country. It doesn't recognise borders. Climate change doesn't do that either. So, you know, climate, health, all of those things which really can be solved through great minds, that shouldn't stay within borders either. So hopefully once everyone is out of that, we get more connectivity back again, so that there's a free flow of ideas across borders, greater connectivity, even if it's not through people flying around. But, you know, I think, you know, as we've been talking about, globalisation will continue. That's critical to economic recovery. When we talk about globalisation, all sorts of things cross borders, emails, ideas. It's not just goods. It's not just money. You know, bringing together people to solve these problems that the world has at the moment. Hopefully.
Yes. I'm just wondering about the future of the business model of the professional services firms, because when you talk about trust and the purpose, you know, the purpose-led motivation, particularly of the younger generations, and possibly older generations after this COVID, because values are definitely going to shift in communities and families because of this. People who have lost loved ones because of this, I think values will change, and expectations of work and who they work for and how they spend their lives. So I'm just wondering, how does that sit with a leveraged structure like a law firm, accounting firm, engineering firm, where you've got the, you know, the sort of pyramid structure where you've got the partner and then a group of senior associates, and then you've got the juniors and so forth. And it is a model that does require quite fine tuning, because you're selling a chargeable hour mostly. Some firms now you know, bill on performance and have other mechanisms. But what do you think about how it may adjust the business model in order to be able to cater for those shifts in human requirements? I agree with you that globalisation will continue, because we're really good now at working virtually, remotely, and through digital means. We're much more comfortable with it. So I think people will get more comfort in building relationships this way, as opposed to getting on a plane and having a meal together. But just coming back to that business model, what are your thoughts about how that may adapt, or may need to adapt, in order to cater for those human aspirations that you've mentioned?
Well, it comes back to value. As I mentioned before, we've got ourselves into this bind where charging is by the minute or the 6-minute unit, or indeed the hour. So whether it's whether charging is by the hour, or whether there's something which actually is a better assessment of the value that you are adding, it comes back to what value are you adding anywhere, and then how do you charge for that value, or how is that regarded? Now, that was happening before this pandemic. It was happening before last year, but again, I think you'll see an acceleration of that. When we talk about AI, certainly that will help, because that commoditized work won't be done by the hour. That will actually be all right. So how can that be delivered more efficiently? That will immediately move you away from the 6-minute hour, and it will move lawyers into, okay, let's solve some of the more complex problems, which ideally will not be valued by the minute or by the hour. It'll actually be a more critical and more meaningful assessment of value. Now, of course, the challenge in all of that, and the challenge when you take out some of the work which lawyers used to learn before, if that's now done through machine learning, the challenge as we bring up our young lawyers is how do we house them as fast as possible into this learning environment. I'm sure we'll find ways to do that. You know, the people we recruit are great, smart minds. They learn pretty fast as well, but they won't have that those many years of learning that we had before. So we'll have to find ways for them to get that experience in ways which is not ploughing through due diligence and yes, the more boring aspects of it. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of relief from that as well. Yeah. But then I do think there will be a shift from the model that we have. It will probably mean that leverage may change as well. But again, that comes to value, and always being very aware of the value that you add. So I'd say to anyone, no matter how senior or junior they are in any organisation, is be very aware of the value you are adding, be aware of your personal brand, differentiate yourself all of the time, and continue to learn, continue to move up that value curve, be it as a firm or be it as an individual, and never ever be complacent about that. And certainly I think that's what a lot of people have learned through COVID, is that, and you're now seeing a move to these, you know, growth mindsets and this continual learning and this thirst for knowledge. And I'd say as soon as you make sure you are focusing on that all of the time, then you're I guess you've at least got a hedge in the system that you're
yes,
looking after yourself.
Yes. It would be remiss of me not to ask about the Australia-China relationship, I think, because, you know, you're an international firm that came about by a merger of, you know, two great firms in those two locations. And I'm just wondering if you could just share your view about how the conversations between the governments has made it easier, harder, you know, how it has impacted businesses like yourselves in the region, how what's been the impact for you of those challenging conversations they've been having at a political level.
Yeah, fascinating times. So I think it's 50 years now since Whitlam went to China, even ahead of the US 50 years ago. And through that, you saw this incredible opening up and change in China, and they have pulled so many people out of deep poverty. It is quite an extraordinary feat to see that having happened over 50 years. And if you say that's what China's done in 50 years, then you have to say to yourself, and where will that country be in the next 30 or 40 or 50 years? Quite extraordinary. And then on the flip side of that, you know, we've talked about globalisation a bit. Australia has thrived off the back of globalisation, and it must remind itself of that often and get out into that mix. How do you put the two together? It's such a shame, you know, two countries who have actually, when we talk about reciprocity, have benefited so much from the other, that I sit here in Hong Kong and I hope that they can start communicating again. I guess while governments are not communicating, people can, businesses can. At a people-to-people level, there are extremely good relationships between the many Chinese and Australians. Australia's been here in Hong Kong for a long time, many decades, and it's done great work across financial services, regulatory, you know, wealth, etc. So I think both countries have an enormous amount to offer each other. I would say both need to be mindful of how they send messages to each other, how they receive the messages of the other. Yes. We talk about mindfulness often. I do hope that they both move to a better place, because I think there are many advantages and many opportunities and so many common interests across the two countries.
Of course.
That you just wouldn't like the situation in which we find ourselves right now to continue. And if I just reflect, the US and China, obviously there's a lot of debate there at the moment. We forget how deeply connected business is, both from a trade and an investment level across the US and China. Australia doesn't have as deep connections. It's more a trade relationship. But that's where you have to look at the real politic across this region. And I certainly hang on to the North Star of, connectedness and understanding and building trust. So, as I say, very soon we'll have 4 of the top 5 economies in the world from the Asian region. Yeah. And Australia has a great place to play in that. So back to what we were talking about before, is how does Australia start to open up its borders and get that connectivity occurring again?
Vaccination, I think.
Vaccination. I've had double Pfizered.
Good on you. Hey, look, it's been wonderful talking with you again, Sue. It's been such a long time, and it's terrific to hear your story from, sitting in Hong Kong and with the mandate across the world and a very strong concentration in Asia. So I really appreciate your time today. But before I let you go, I have that last tricky question, which is, if you became chief executive of the world for a moment, sometime in the near future, what would be your priorities for you? What would you aim to address first?
Oh, chief executive of the world. Well, that's a tricky one. I think, we've talked about this before. It's, how do you achieve greater understanding? And even if that's step by step, I think China's got, I can't say it in Chinese, but how do you cross a river? You walk feeling each pebble or stone crossing that river along the way. I don't think anyone would think that it is particularly easy at the moment. But you have to start. And if it's to come together in relation to some of those great challenges, be it climate, be it health, be it pandemics, then that's where it starts. Common interest, building a greater sense of understanding. I think backing that up, you don't do that from being at home all the time. You have to reach out into the world. Now, that's not to deny the domestic politics that we have at the moment, which, of course, is well and truly in play. So, you've got to play global politics, and you've got to be very aware of the domestic politics in play at the moment. But if we start feeling the stones as we cross the river, we should start on climate. I think there's talk now that the US and China will start that engagement. That's a great first step. If they can do that also in relation to health, then that's a great step as well. I don't think anyone wants to see great confrontation. I don't think anyone minds great competition. Competition's always good. But great confrontation, nobody wants. So
nobody enjoys.
Nobody enjoys. And I would hope by getting some work done on the common interests that we can find better understanding, but not easy. And I think, we pray, and our thoughts are certainly with the leaders across the world at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Patience.
Yeah, okay. Brilliant answer. Thank you so much. Very insightful. Thank you, Sue, Chief Executive, King Wood Mallesons in Hong Kong. It's been terrific talking with you today.
Thanks to see you, Pamela.
And you too.
Cheers.